So we also have one of the arrangement which is rarely you will find in any democratic country, especially in democratic federal countries. That is the situation of emergency, right? So we will firstly talk about the emergency provisions. Now this is the deviance and this is the constitutional mechanism through which entire center state relationship can be disrupted. तो एक बारी हमने सेंटर स्टेट रिलेशनशिप देख लिया. Then we will see what is the constitutional mechanism through which this center state relationship can be disturbed. Then we will finally come to the various reports of various commissions or committees. हमें कौन कौन से commissions committees हम consider करेंगे? So there is first Administrative Reforms Commission 1966 around, right? Then we will in detail there are, see, this is the Administrative Reforms Commission. It might have given certain recommendations on center-state relationship, but the main purpose of this was not center-state relationship. ये administrative reforms के लिए commission लाई गई. Now there are two specific commissions which were formed for center-state relationship. So one is under Justice Rajendra Sarkaria. So this is Sarkaria Commission. This is in the year 1983. Then we have second Administrative Reforms Commission. That was year 2005. That is more important for us to read in other subjects like governance, internal security, ethics. इन सब में आपको second ARC को बहुत पढ़ना है. So this was the second ARC. एक दो point इन्होंने भी बोला है about the interstate council and all. The second ARC. It was the year 2005. And then during the year 2007. There was a commission called Panchi Commission during the year 2007. So these two commissions, Sarkaria Commission and Panchi Commission, has given elaborate recommendations upon various facets of center-state relationship, about the legislative relationship, about the role of governor, about the role of interstate council, etc. So all these dimensions we are going to cover today. Emergency, the use of Article 356. In what manner, in what ways, and at what point of time Article 356 should be imposed, can be imposed or not, right? So ये सारी चीजें हमें cover करनी है आज, right? So let's see what are the deviances which has been suggested by the Constitution itself when center-state relationship can be retained or central-state relationship can be disturbed. So as I was telling that this kinds of situation, the emergency provision which is given under our constitution, you will not find in most of the democratic countries. You take example of US, you take example of Canada, you take example of UK. UK में ज़्यादा problem है नहीं क्योंकि UK is a unitary country. वहाँ पे there is no center-state relationship, so all the power is concentrated already in the hands of union. What happens in emergency in our country? That all the powers of the state gets into the hands of union. So this is a deviation from the normal procedure. But UK में normal procedure यही है कि वहाँ पे center ही center. Another you can take example of Australia. So these are the countries where they have federal government and the provincial government or the state government. You will not find these kinds of constitutional provision anywhere in these countries. But there are various constitutional experts, like you can take example of 𝐂𝐭𝐲. He has told India to be a quasi-federation. He is the person. So while discussing about it, he talks about that this kinds of emergency provision is rare in Indian constitution. But it is not that this kinds of phenomena for the purpose of which emergency has been put in our constitution cannot occur in other countries. हमारे constitution में what is the purpose of emergency provisions? Is to deal with the situations of threat to the security of India, is to deal with the situations of armed rebellion or internal disturbance as it was before 1976. तो क्या ऐसा सिर्फ इंडिया में हो सकता है? अमेरिका में वॉर नहीं हो सकता? ऑस्ट्रेलिया में नहीं हो सकता? These are the countries which have faced the two world wars. इंडिया तो उस समय colonized country था ना, उसका अपना कोई सही नहीं था. Actually, America, Australia, Canada, these were the countries which were the forerunners of the two world wars. So what is the situation then? Because at the point when the country is facing war, it is but obvious that all powers should be concentrated with one government. You cannot have a multiple government, but constitution does not provide so. Then what are the arrangements they are opting for? Now there are 2-3 terms. In US Constitution, defense of state is mentioned. Defense of the state means US. That is mentioned. Now, while there will be a situation of war-like situation, so it will be the Supreme Court of these countries which will be giving this a wider interpretation of these terms: defense, security, war. And then Supreme Court may give their assumptions that this is such a situation where the power of union is so expansive. काम वहां भी वही होगा, बट वहां पे सुप्रीम कोर्ट के जजमेंट के थ्रू यूनियन गवर्नमेंट को पावर्स मिल जाती है ड्यूरिंग द टाइम ऑफ वॉर. But in our constitution, we have written in the constitution itself. Now, it was debated that why we are incorporating these kinds of deadly provisions, because there were people who has raised severe objection and criticism against Article 356. Now, there were two factions. One, you can say the people who were believing that Article 356 will be a kind of a dead provision, which will never be used. आर्टिकल 356 क्या है? प्रेसिडेंट रूल लगाया जा सकता है किसी स्टेट में. सो वन पोर्शन ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंट असेंबली टोल्ड दैट दिस विल बी अ डेड प्रोविजन, इसका कभी हम यूज करेंगे ही नहीं. बट देयर वर अदर फैक्शंस इन द कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंट असेंबली इटसेल्फ who were skeptic about it. They knew that there may be certain political situations जहां पे आर्टिकल 356 का मिसयूज होगा. Then why did we come? Why did not we leave it to the judicial interpretation? Because in our constitution we already find such a elaborate provisions of division of powers between union and states. There is a little scope which has been left for the judiciary. So अगर आपने powers को इतने elaborately दे दिया है, so don't you think it will be rational to provide for the disturbances in that power arrangement? बाकी तो अमेरिका कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन पॉकेट साइज है, वहां पे इतना इलेबोरेट सेंटर स्टेट रिलेशनशिप दिया ही नहीं है. जब कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में सेंटर स्टेट रिलेशनशिप नहीं दिया है, बिकॉज टेक्निकली द स्टेट्स हैव द ऑटोनॉमी, सारे पावर उनके पास है इन देयर इंटरनल मैटर्स. जब वहां मेन प्रोविजंस नहीं दिया है तो सब्सिडियरी प्रोविजन लिखने की बात ही नहीं आती. हमारे यहाँ इलेबोरेट सेंटर स्टेट रिलेशनशिप दे रखा है. एंड नाउ आफ्टर गिविंग दिस मच इलेबोरेट प्रोविजंस, एंड नाउ इफ यू लीव इट जुडिशियरी, जुडिशियरी कैसे इंटरप्रेट करेगी उसको, इट वाज नॉट श्योर. So the makers of constitution thought that it's better to go for a written set of emergency provision to deal with extraordinary situation rather than leaving it to the judicial minds. ठीक है, तो क्या है वो provisions when emergency can be imposed? So you know, कभी इमरजेंसी का सुना होगा, हमारे देश में इमरजेंसी लगी थी. कब लगी थी? 1975. पहले बाद उसके नहीं लगी, उसके बाद नहीं लगी, उससे पहले तो लगी है. 1975 is not the only instance of emergency. There has been emergencies before 1965 also. क्या है इमरजेंसी, कितने तरीके की होती है? So let's discuss about that, then we will able to analyze it in a better way. So there are three kinds of emergency provisions which has been given in our constitution. One is national emergency. National emergency is under Article 352. Then you can call it a state emergency or by the name of president rule. And then you have financial emergency. This state emergency is under Article 356. And financial emergency is under Article 360. So what are those situations? What are those grounds? If that occurs, emergency can be imposed. Who can impose an emergency? So this power, either to impose national emergency, state emergency or financial emergency, only the President of India can impose these emergencies. When can they impose? अब इसके लिए आपको यू हैव टू डिवाइड, पहले वी विल डिस्कस अबाउट द नेशनल इमरजेंसी. यू विल हैव टू डिवाइड द होल थिंग बिफोर हियर इज 1978 is the 44th Amendment Act. इमरजेंसी के जितने भी प्रोविजंस हैं, you can read it, the provisions which were before 1978, before 44th Amendment Act, and what are the provisions after 44th Amendment Act. With regards to the provisions or imposition of emergency, 44th Amendment Act is a watershed movement. अब ऐसा क्यों हुआ? देखो, emergency was imposed in 1975. During that time, a year later, we came out with a massive amendment to our constitution, the 42nd Amendment. There were a lot of provisions which were changed. That is during the emergency period. But due to the manner in which the emergency was imposed, it raised a serious question about the democratic ethos of our country, about the constitutional safeguards the people had, about the value of dissenting opinion in a democracy. So, एक है emergency. Whatever acts were done during that time, 44th Amendment Act is majorly concentrated to nullify those acts. Whatever the loopholes were there, which were present in our constitution, which were abused in order to impose the emergency. For an example, let's take Article 352 of the Constitution. Before 44th Amendment Act, it mentioned that national emergency can be imposed by the President of India on the advice of the Council of Ministers. अब होता क्या है? Prime Minister of course is the most powerful person. So इंदिरा जी ने प्रेसिडेंट को एडवाइस कर दिया, प्रेसिडेंट ने नेशनल इमरजेंसी लगा दी. There was no advice of the Council of Ministers which was sought. After the emergency was declared, then a formal meeting of the Council of Ministers was convened, and then it was not sought the advice. Simply they were informed कि हाँ भाई इमरजेंसी लग गई है. वो तो रेडियो से भी बता देते. So it was mentioned that Council of Ministers, but there were no concrete provision. Council of Ministers, who is the channel of communication? It is the Prime Minister. अब Prime Minister President को बोल दे कि भैया Council नहीं बोला है तो. So now you see that a national emergency can only be imposed now after 44th Amendment Act only if the written advice of every member of the cabinet has been communicated to the President. Now here you will find the mention of word cabinet. और कैबिनेट का मतलब क्या है ये भी वहां डिफाइन किया हुआ है. Those members of the Council of Ministers who are of the cabinet rank. ठीक है, तो कैबिनेट रैंक भी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में मेंशन्ड है और the word cabinet itself is mentioned. So what happened after 44th Amendment? Only on the written advice of cabinet, President can impose. Now, what are those grounds when President can impose? So it mentioned if President of India is satisfied. Now you should note the satisfaction of President. Can it be questioned in the court or not? ये भी एक सवाल हो सकता है. Now if I am talking about if President of India is satisfied, so is it actually the President of India or is it the cabinet whose satisfaction is material here? President of India cannot do anything on his own. This we know. So satisfaction of the president, what we are talking about, is actually the satisfaction of the cabinet. But can it be called into court or not? Emergency lagaya, whether you are actually satisfied of these grounds. Which grounds? Emergency कब लगाई जा सकती है? There are two grounds. One is war or external aggression, and other is armed rebellion. But this term armed rebellion has been inserted by 44th Amendment Act. It was not there in the previous original constitution. So original constitution contained two grounds. One is war or external aggression. जरूरी नहीं है कि बाहर से जो हमला हो हमेशा वॉर ही हो. War happens between two sovereigns. And internal disturbance. Internal disturbance was a bit vague and bit wider term. Internal disturbance could include anything. But every internal disturbance, you cannot say that it is posing a threat to the security of India. क्योंकि प्रेसिडेंट तो तभी इमरजेंसी लगा सकते हैं ना when he is satisfied that if there is a threat to the security of India or any part of India. जब तक प्रेसिडेंट इस बात से संतुष्ट नहीं है कि भारत के किसी एक पर्टिकुलर पोर्शन पे या पूरे इंडिया पे देयर इज अ थ्रेट ऑफ सिक्योरिटी, ही शुड नॉट इम्पोज द इमरजेंसी, एंड दैट थ्रेट टू सिक्योरिटी may be either on the grounds of war or external aggression or internal disturbance। मैं पुरानी बात कर रहा हूं 1978 के पहले। तो कहने का मतलब सुप्रीम कोर्ट जब जजमेंट आपसे जजमेंट एनालाइज करती है, what Supreme Court has observed that every action of internal disturbance cannot create a threat to the security, so it is better to replace the internal disturbance. Now armed rebellion itself is indicating that people have raised the arm and they are rebelling against the state. This means there is a threat to security. This is the difference between two terms, internal disturbance and armed rebellion. अभी किस grounds पे, if you talk about the present day situation, what are those grounds on which emergency can be imposed? So if there is a threat to the security of India or any part of India on the grounds of war or external aggression or armed rebellion, so on this ground emergency can be imposed. So firstly, there has to be existing ground that if there is a war, if there is any armed rebellion, president is satisfied that due to this there is a threat to the security, then if he receives the written advice of the cabinet, he can declare the emergency. Now what after emergency? What are the processes which needs to require? एक और चीज है, once the emergency is declared, it can continue for a period of, पहले ऐसा नहीं था. The time before 1978, it was once emergency has been imposed, it can continue until the executive wanted it to continue, until the president revoked the emergency. But after 44th Amendment Act, it told that once declared, emergency can continue till 6 months. This periodic approval, that after 6 months again executive will need the permission of the parliament. After 6 months again executive will need the permission of the parliament. पहले ऐसा नहीं था, एक बार इमरजेंसी लगा दिया, लगाते रहो, चलते रहेगा वो. But this element of periodic review and periodic check by the parliament was inserted by 44th Amendment Act itself. So at this point of time, if you talk about once the emergency has been proclaimed, once the emergency has been issued in India, it can continue for a maximum period of 6 months. After that, if further it requires to be extended, again the approval of parliament is required. Approval of parliament means what? Both the houses of parliament. So both the houses of parliament should approve the emergency. And with what majority? A special majority. A special majority means a majority of total membership of the house, that is absolute majority plus 2/3 of present and voting. Both should be there. This majority से हम amendment करते हैं. So in order to approve any emergency, it is required that there has to be a special majority. Before 1978, before 44th Amendment Act, it could have been done only with the simple majority. उससे पहले 1978 से पहले भी इमरजेंसी लागू करने के बाद पार्लियामेंट की अप्रूवल चाहिए होती थी, बट ओनली विद अ सिंपल मेजॉरिटी. देयर वाज नो रिक्वायरमेंट ऑफ स्पेशल मेजॉरिटी. राइट नाउ there was very you can say contrasting provision which was mentioned or which was missing from our constitution, you can say. You know that once emergency has been imposed, fundamental rights can be suspended. There are two articles हमने पढ़ा है fundamental rights के समय, 358 and 359. So under article 358, if emergency is imposed on the grounds of war and external aggression, article 19 automatically gets suspended. If emergency is imposed on other grounds, other fundamental rights can be suspended via article 359. But now you know that Article 20 and 21 cannot be suspended. This protection was not provided earlier. तभी ADM जबलपुर केस हो गया. When in the ADM Jabalpur case, Supreme Court gave this verdict that even a right to life and liberty can be suspended during emergency. मतलब देश में इमरजेंसी लगाइए और हिटलर बन जाइए, होलोकॉस्ट कर दीजिए, गैस चेंबर में भर दीजिए लोगों को. So this was a this ADM Jabalpur case has been severely criticized as to be violative of personal liberty or even to leading to the suspension of habeas corpus. उसको दूसरा habeas corpus case के नाम से भी जानते हैं. Now this was taken into account while 44th Amendment Act was enacted. This 44th Amendment Act says all the fundamental rights can be suspended except Article 20 and 21. This is another protection which has been given for imposition of emergency to us, the citizens. That all the fundamental rights may be suspended, but except 20 and 21. Right? Now, once the emergency has been imposed, it needs to be approved by the Parliament. But within how many days? Within 30 days, within 1 month. So once emergency has been imposed, it needs to be approved by the Parliament, both houses of Parliament, within 1 month. But एक situation समझते हैं कि today is 16th June 2023 and today emergency was proclaimed by the President. On 18th June, Lok Sabha was dissolved. Lok Sabha was dissolved. It can happen due to any circumstances. Then what happens? Or if Lok Sabha is already in dissolved state, then election होने वाला था, बीच में किसी के साथ लड़ाई हो गई, then what happens? मैंने तो बोला कि 1 महीने के अंदर दोनों हाउस से अप्रूव कराना होगा, but now one house is not functional even. So in this meantime, it has to be approved by the राज्य सभा. अगर ऐसा होता है तो राज्यसभा तो रहती है ना हमेशा. Then get it approved by the Rajya Sabha with 2/3 majority and wait for the time when Lok Sabha comes into the session. And the day when Lok Sabha is reconvened, within 30 days it should get approved. Otherwise, emergency would lapse. This provision of 1 month was previously 2 months. 44th Amendment Act से पहले this time limit was 2 months. It is again reduced to 1 month कि 1 महीने के अंदर ही आपको दोनों हाउसेस से अप्रूव कराना पड़ेगा. However, if Lok Sabha is dissolved in the meanwhile, it needs to be approved by the Rajya Sabha and should wait when the Lok Sabha will be reconvened, and the day it is reconvening, the 30 days time will be given within which executive needs to get it approved from Lok Sabha also. Otherwise, emergency would lapse. आपको एक चीज गौर करनी है, बिफोर 1978 दैट इज 44th अमेंडमेंट एक्ट एंड आफ्टर 44th अमेंडमेंट एक्ट इमरजेंसी प्रोविजन में चेंज तो हुआ है, बट ऑल दीज चेंजेस हैज बीन डन विथ एन इंटेंशन टू मेक इट टफर टू इंपोज इमरजेंसी एंड मेक इट इजियर टू रिवोक इमरजेंसी. इमरजेंसी लगाने को टफ किया गया है और इमरजेंसी हटाने को इजी किया गया बाय द 44th अमेंडमेंट 1978. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, विदिन 1, पहले क्या था, 2 महीने के अंदर आप अप्रूव कराओगे, मतलब बिना अप्रूव कराए यू कैन कंटिन्यू इन इमरजेंसी फॉर 2 months, बट नाउ विदिन 1 month ओनली यू नीड टू गेट इट अप्रूव. बिफोर देयर वाज नो प्रोविजन ऑफ रिवोकिंग इमरजेंसी एक्सेप्ट बाय द चॉइस ऑफ द एग्जीक्यूटिव. जब तक प्रेसिडेंट नहीं चाहे तब तक इमरजेंसी हट नहीं सकती, बट नाउ वी विल सी देयर आर वेरियस प्रोविजंस थ्रू व्हिच इमरजेंसी कैन बी रिवोक्ड. इंपोज करने का तरीका तो हमने देख लिया, अब हटा कैसे सकते हैं हम इमरजेंसी. So earlier there was no specific method that how emergency can be revoked, but now the emergency can be revoked in 3 ways. One is lapse. इमरजेंसी लगा दी, 1 महीने के अंदर दोनों हाउसेस से पास होना था, पास नहीं हो पाई, इमरजेंसी लैप्स कर गई. So one is the by way of lapsing, and that is due to failure of getting approval of the both houses of parliament. Right? Second is if Lok Sabha passes a resolution now with simple majority, any time when emergency is continuing, मान लो 16 जून को इमरजेंसी लगा दी, अब 20 अक्टूबर को लोकसभा को याद है कि यार देश में इमरजेंसी लगी, हटाओ इसको। Then Lok Sabha passes a resolution with simple majority, remove the emergency. It is mandatory upon the president to remove the emergency. I am talking only about the Lok Sabha. This is specific power of the Lok Sabha, special power of the Lok Sabha. While imposing the emergency, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha both has equal power, but while revoking the emergency, Lok Sabha has more powers. So if Lok Sabha passes a resolution with a simple majority, the president has to revoke the emergency. President will have to take back his proclamation. Now what if the Lok Sabha is not in session? मान लीजिए 16 जून को हमने इमरजेंसी लगा दी, इमरजेंसी चल रहा है. Now on 16th October, if at least 1/10 of the members of Lok Sabha wants, बहुत हो गई इमरजेंसी, हमारा काम हो गया इमरजेंसी, security of India has gone away, मतलब it is now taken care of. The threat to the security of India has gone away and there is no more threat to the security of India. So if at least 1/10 of the members of the Lok Sabha wants the emergency to be removed, 1/10 से तो सिंपल मेजोरिटी आती नहीं है, but it will become a mandatory to convene a session of Lok Sabha and do the voting on such a resolution. मतलब ये तो लोकसभा सेशन में है तो उन्होंने सिंपल मेजोरिटी से पास कर दिया, बट लोकसभा सेशन में नहीं है, छुट्टी पे है. But at least if 1/10 of the members of the Lok Sabha want, they can inform the president or the speaker, please convene a meeting of the Lok Sabha, we want to do the voting. And it becomes mandatory for the president or speaker to convene the meeting of the Lok Sabha within 14 days. 14 दिनों के अंदर अगर 1/10 members of the Lok Sabha they have intimated that we want to do a voting on the revocation of emergency, then it is mandatory. There will be a sitting which will be called for the Lok Sabha and there has to be a voting on this resolution. And if then Lok Sabha passes with simple majority to remove emergency, president will be bound to remove emergency. Clear है? Now third way is simply, इसमें कोई ज्यादा बवाल नहीं है. President has imposed the emergency, president can take back the emergency by a subsequent proclamation. Right?